Now we are live. Let me just turn this off and turn that off. Hey, everyone. Look who... Oh, I have to turn one more thing. There we go. I always have to turn off the YouTube channel that I'm monitoring because I hear myself talking back. So, Final Cut Pro TV Live. Today we have Mr. Brad Olson to my left. Bottom left, Cris Mertens, and right below me, Stephen Moyer, and 3 Final Cut Pro 10 filmmakers. We're
here.
We're going to be talking about No Escape. Well, I mean, you guys have had professional releases. I'm on local television station. I just put
4 filmmakers.
That makes 4. Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
That's true. 4. I put out a documentary. We have a local group that's been cleaning up the Liberty Reservoir on their own time on weekends. They run around and clean up these. It's our place where we get our water. They clean up these trails. They've been doing it for 5 years, picking up trash and stuff. It's incredible. So I did a documentary on that just recently. It got picked up.
Nice.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. So we're going to talk about No Escape today and filmmaking in general. Of course, we're going to talk about Final Cut Pro 10.4.9. We're going to talk about proxy workflows, all that good stuff, right?
Let's get into it.
But let's do the film. Let's start with the film. So No Escape is opening in 45 theaters in the U.S. on Friday.
Yeah.
There are still 45 theaters open
Well,
in the U.S.
that's the question. Yeah.
It's going to be in those states that maybe are a little more open and lax on the rules. Let's look the other way on that one, but still proud of the fact that it's opening in 45 theaters. I hope the people that go to those theaters are safe and social distance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please stay safe.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah.
Please stay safe. That's all I mean to say.
Well, they're
We're
probably
super happy.
every other seat, maybe.
Well, in
Maybe.
our theaters locally, because I feel like there's been a little bit of a decline in regular theater attendance over the last 10 years.
Yes.
And some of our theaters, they've got bigger seats now, so they already feel like they're 6 feet apart. They got like tables between them. So.
Well, that's true.
and they're,
I've
like,
seen those. Yeah.
rumble seats and stuff.
Yeah. Or it's those big reclining, those like sofa chair basically, and everyone's in leather chairs reclining back, and it's like a good space. But regardless, if you it is coming out in 45 theaters on Friday, which is incredible, but it is also coming out on VOD simultaneously. So if you want to stay home and you want to check it out in a safe environment, you can do that as well.
So the theaters, are they mostly on the West Coast, or are they spread out all across the U.S.?
They're spread out evenly across the United States. I don't have all the exact states, but I just know that it's not clustered anywhere. It's just kind of all over.
Okay.
Yeah.
So wasn't VR supposed to fix the whole stay-at-home theater experience where you put on the goggles, and then there's people that have logged in, and they're next to you or by you in the virtual, and you got spatial audio, so it sounds like they've got microphones and stuff.
I would have other people in that atmosphere, like opening bags and crinkling, and just to get that immersive.
Get a baby crying.
Yeah, exactly. You were on the same.
You just turn to your left, and there's an emoji next to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want that experience. We need the theater. Everyone keeps talking about the theater experience and how important it is.
Well, so the new theater experience that's kind of reemerging now is the drive-in, right? Because you can be in a vehicle and you can be in your own space and you can do it safely. And you get to, a lot of people haven't been to drive-ins, right? It's this antiquated kind of thing. You might have gone as like a novelty at some point, but it's like, it's actually coming back. And there are 3 drive-ins this Friday that are actually going to be playing our possibly near you and see it in your car and have like a communal experience.
They've opened up a couple of drive-in theaters in my area. That one's been open for a long time, but they've opened up a couple of more. You know, I don't know what's involved with making a big screen, but you still got to get audio to everybody. I guess you can do it over the radios nowadays.
It's through the radio in your car, yeah. So if you have a good sound system, you're all set. I don't know how that works with. I don't know if surround sound works. I feel like it's a stereo situation. I don't think they're doing. That's a super fancy setup if you got it like a 5.1 in your car. I did recently, so a really good movie I recently went and saw with my wife on her birthday. I took her to go see Knives Out, which she hadn't seen at a drive-in.
I saw that.
And
wow, yeah.
If there is not a better movie to go see at a drive-in, it's a whodunit murder mystery, Clue-like movie. That one was fantastic. People were honking their horns during like climactic scenes. It was great.
That's hilarious. Well, and if you're not a fan of Rian Johnson's Last Jedi, I still think you got to go see Knives Out because I think he did a fantastic job on that.
It's so good.
It was a good movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the making of No Escape. You changed the title, or the network, I mean the theaters changed the title for the U.S. versus Europe?
Yeah, so the original title was Follow Me. It still is internationally. So if you're overseas anywhere, it's going to be that. And it's been surreal seeing kind of all that marketing push on Instagram. If you just do like, you know, if you Twitter or Instagram, if you look up No Escape or Follow Me, seeing some of that like people are in subways in Berlin and it's just the poster of the movie and like commuters are going by. It's in shopping malls. It's up on a few billboards in Germany, which is insane. So the marketing push on that, but yeah, Follow Me was the original title. And then the distributors, just for the sake of, you know, possibly Follow Me being a slightly generic term that might be hard to search or might be hard to find. If you type in the title was changed to No Escape here in the US.
And No Escape, tell us briefly what it's about. I know what it's about because I want to rent it this weekend when it comes out. Probably iTunes or Apple TV, whatever the heck it is.
Right, so it's a social media influencer, kind of like a Logan Paul-ish type personality, a big, huge star that's on a platform called YouPick, which is our kind of version of YouTube. And this guy is celebrating his 10-year anniversary on the channel and like a huge subscriber base. And so to commemorate that occasion, his best friends are taking him to this wild, hyper-exclusive escape room that's located in Russia. And it's this escape room company essentially that builds private escape rooms based around one person's kind of fears, and it's an isolated experience, and they go through it and they tear it all down and they move on. It's not a thing that a bunch of people go to. So they kind of do this hyper exclusive thing. They go to Moscow, they meet this character that is questionably trustworthy or not trustworthy, and he's their main contact for this place. They then go to this escape room experience. It turns into a situation where it's not only not what they were expecting, but it becomes slightly dangerous, but in a playful way. And they're not really sure if it's part of the experience of the escape room or if it's actually dangerous. Right. And then the lines between reality and social media kind of start blurring and they start losing track of what's what. And as the movie goes on, the viewer hopefully starts having that line blurred for themselves. And then you start questioning, like, who can you trust while you're watching it? Yeah. So it's a roller coaster ride. We've got Keegan Allen, who was in Pretty Little Liars, Holland Roden, who's in Teen Wolf, a huge, awesome cast of people. Pasha Lynchnikov, who was on Deadwood, amongst a ton of other movies, as like a huge, awesome Russian bad guy. And so it's a great cast, great premise for a fun time at the movies.
Stephen, how did you get hooked up with this project?
I think I met Cris so I can't remember if we were live when we were chatting about this earlier, but we used to do Final Cut dinners here in Los Angeles.
Right, the Cabal, the Final Cut Pro Cabal I keep hearing about.
It's been put on hold for COVID purposes, but it will resume hopefully in the future.
So I think I met Cris there initially, and we did chat a little bit, and then we saw each other again at Lacy Pug, which is run by Michael Horton, which is absolutely awesome. I think they've moved that to a digital format now, which is
actually Mike Horton announced he was going to end them, but he might be still doing virtual ones. But he was kind of disappointed that they couldn't meet in person, and I think he's been talking about retiring for years anyway. But anyway,
well, that's a bummer. But as it is,
bring the
it
mood
is
down.
still like an important piece of like the cultural puzzle of what it means to be in post-production in Los Angeles, and you know, Michael has dedicated a lot of his time to that. But yes, I think Chris and I saw each other a second time at Lacy Pug, and it just so happened that I think Chris had just been brought on to this film by Will Wernick, a director he'd worked with previously, and they were interested in cutting in Final Cut, and they were looking for an assistant. And so he already knows I cut in Final Cut, that I work in Final Cut because of the dinner. Now he sees me at Lacy Pug, so I think
taking studious notes.
Yeah,
I was like, that's my guy.
Connecting the dots, and I do remember Chris approaching me, see if I had any interest in doing this, and I absolutely was. I mean, this was pretty much, like one of my first times getting to collaborate with another Final Cut editor in this way on a large enough project. But yeah, the rest is history. After those two meetings, we locked it in and we just moved forward and drove through it as fast as we could.
Now you guys are like a Final Cut Pro tag team for LA, right?
Yep.
If you get, it's like the tag team wrestlers. If you try to convince people to use Final Cut Pro versus something else. So, Chris, you were saying earlier something about Premiere being a big player in LA and Hollywood and stuff, or?
Well, I mean, certainly, it's all flavors out here. I know Avid is obviously the king of the hill when it comes to large Hollywood productions. Premiere seems to be kind of the second king on the hill when it comes to other studios that have multiple editors. And the place I'm at currently right now, Warner Brothers Animation, is a Premiere house. And so we were trying to convert our current show. So the show that I'm actually on, Brad, I think you were asking earlier, what's everyone up to? The show I'm on right now is Young Justice Season 4. And so it's an animated show about kind of all of the sidekicks of the Justice League. And they've kind of got their own show. And the first 3 seasons were wild. And so I was completely honored to be asked to come on to Season 4. The showrunners are a director I've worked with before named Brandon Vietti, who's done tons and tons of animation stuff. And then Greg Wiseman, who's the original creator of Gargoyles. Which I was a huge fan of as a kid. And so to have him as my boss is like super, super surreal and incredible. Brilliant guy. And so anyway, started working there, and we were trying to flip the show to Final Cut. And my assistant right now is Jordan Maltby. He's also Final Cut X. Shout out Final Cut X assistants. And we tried our damnedest. But ultimately, we kind of both realized that for the betterment of the show, it just felt right to kind of stay in the standard. It sounds boring, but like the standard operating procedures of the place, because we knew that while we might get tons and tons of speed benefits by using Final Cut X, we would still be in an isolated bubble where we wouldn't be fitting in well at the studio. We would be this outlier of like, well, we're moving super fast, but every time we try to help, integrate with anyone else or share a deliverable, or if I'm sick, or if I've got to take, if I'm going on vacation, they're just, not going to have that Rolodex full of assistants, right? It's a rare breed here out in LA to find someone that's like super well versed in Final Cut X, which again is a shame. Watch Brad's movie, educate yourself about why Final Cut X is the NLE that everyone should be using. But that being said, we decided to stay in Premiere. So we are rocking and rolling now. We've come up with a pretty good workflow, and we're slamming and jamming. The show's coming along great.
So we got a comment that said, Gargoyles was a great show. I am a fan of the show and Gargoyles themselves.
Yeah, it's a great show. If anyone hasn't seen it, I mean, I forgot the original release date. It's way back, but 90s, like early 90s cartoons. It's fantastic. Great characters,
you can
dark.
binge it now on Disney Plus.
There you go. Just binge the whole thing. Yeah, that was the first time I think it was the very first cartoon where I was like, am I allowed to watch this? Like, it's like, you know what I mean? It was like kind of dark, and there were like really mature themes, and it was like, it was dealing with a lot of like very advanced kind of moral kind of stuff. Well, and I felt like as a kid, I was getting away with something by being able to watch it.
Right.
The Batman show was in the 90s was a lot like that too. It was pretty dark. I remember both those shows being thematically pretty dark and dealing with heavy topics.
Yeah.
So how did Final Cut Pro? How is that an advantage to doing no escape?
I mean, I'll let Steven take that one. I think from a workflow standpoint, we interfaced very early on with Mike Matzdorf, who helped us kind of come up with like some really creative ideas on how to utilize it. But Steven, I mean, you take point on this.
It's all about metadata, baby. It's all about metadata.
Yeah.
We did our best to leverage metadata to the max, and you know, I still learn things every day, and from what I remember, I think my sensibilities were pretty decently fine-tuned. At the time, we were doing things like having a shared spreadsheet as our script supervisor notes. And so that would give me sort of a live look at what's happening on location, on set. And at the end of the day, those notes would get sent to me. We would use Shot Notes X to bring in all those notes, marry them to the footage right away. We would then use Sync and Link to marry audio to the footage. And then going even deeper, I would add, I actually requested that our script supervisor add additional columns in our Shot Notes template for the shared spreadsheet. So we had information about what characters were in a shot, what angle the shot was, whether it was wide, extreme wide, a close-up, whatever it may be. And, you know, just little things like this really add up to save enormous swaths of time. So as an assistant, you know, it definitely takes sort of like an extra bit of foresight to figure this stuff out and plan before we start shooting. But if you can get a grapple on it, and if you can collaborate with all the other department heads to get everything going, whether that means jam synced time code or doing some sort of notation strategy like our script supervisor agreed to for that project, I mean, it'll supercharge your workflow. You know, it's really nice to be able to enable Cris to search for someone's name and then an angle, and to get a list populated with exactly that. So that really is like the power of it. I mean, we also did our best to leverage roles, not just for audio, but for separating things like VFX and ADR and other kinds of work, which helps with turnovers and which helps with, you know, communication between us. But yeah, I wouldn't choose anything else personally.
Well, you know, it's interesting you talk about roles for things like VFX, because I see these timelines that are posted up on Facebook all the time of here's the timeline from Mission Impossible or from Star Wars or from whatever, and I just look at all the nauseating amounts of tracks. And I think about how I use a roles-based workflow. 40 tracks up and 90 tracks down, and you're just like, oh man, it looks like a color, like someone just confettied all over.
But usually they're proud of those timelines. I see people put them up like they're proud of them.
Sure,
but I mean, when you see a Final Cut X timeline, it's like it's one thing.
More compact, right?
Yeah, because everything's hidden from view when it's unnecessary and not needed, you know, and so everything's just streamlined and simple and easy. And if you need to dive into those details, you can expand them temporarily, make your adjustment, and then close it again. But when I see those timelines, it makes me have an anxiety attack, because I'm just like, can you imagine trying to go into a timeline like that and make an adjustment? Like, that is the one thing that is killing us. I mean, it's killing me just in my heart when I use Premiere, is people, you know, it's like you make a cut, you make another cut, you take something out, you've got that gap, and people are like, just ripple delete, baby. And I'm like, I don't want to ripple delete, because things slide out of alignment and things break. I just want to have that magnetic timeline. I need things to just close, because also every choice, you know, in Final Cut, you make a slice, throw things out, things are sliding together, and you can just kind of move and adjust and edit on the fly. But when you're Premiere, you really need to think like, mentally, you need to think like 6 steps ahead of what you're about to do to make sure you're not going to cause a car crash. And that's infuriating.
That was always a problem in Final Cut Pro 7. If you're zoomed in on your timeline and everything's off screen, and you make an adjustment, and then 15 minutes later you realize something down here is out of sync. You have to undo.
A couple of days ago, what you just said, I'm zoomed in, I think I've got all my bases covered. I made a cut. I lifted something. I ripple deleted, and I didn't realize that like track 29 was locked, and it was my music track. So everything slid, but because that track was locked, all my music went out of alignment, and I didn't realize until like 2 hours later. And I was like, "Why are all my cues out of sync?" And then so I just slid everything back. But it's like that stuff is terrifying.
It used to be. I like to tell people that when I was in Final Cut 7. But I still have edited in Resolve and Premiere over the years, and especially though in the Final Cut 7 days, I would have 5 to 10 minute conversations with my client or producer about making a change before I made the change, because if we were at that point when it was so complicated, I would just be like, well, do you really want to do it?
Right.
And now I just do it because who cares?
You can just sling things around and they just move out of the way. It doesn't matter.
See, that and this is my new favorite term, is just a conflict of interest, right? Like that's just that now means you're not putting the story first. You're putting a technical
work first.
It's a problem. I mean, what's weird is I was actually trying to think about the last time this happened to me. The last time moving a scene, moving a chunk of media out of a sequence or around in a sequence threw me out of sync. I actually can't remember. I don't know. I'm sure it's happened at least like once or twice recently, like in the last year or two.
Yeah.
But that's how infrequently. I mean, that's pretty amazing to me. Like that I can't think of an instance of it.
The most common thing for me would be, oops, I deleted a connected clip. Edit, undo.
Right.
And then just use the right key command. Like it's so quick, I don't even think about it. But because I see it happen, because I can see those clip connections.
Right.
But
I've done that too. I have to.
I had a. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
I was going to say I have to redo the clip connection before I delete something. If I do that, I can see, I deleted the audio by mistake. Let me adjust it down to another clip that's going to stay. Then I'll do the delete.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you guys, because a lot of the projects I work on are really fast. In fact, this last feature film, the one I'm editing right now, we shot with, it was a kind of a quarantine situation. So we shot with 2 characters, 2 locations, 7 days, 2 pocket cameras. I mean, we're talking really quick turnaround.
Right.
And most of the time we got these little indie features I do are like 2 to 3 week shoots. Mm-hmm. So can you give us a picture of like, how long are you shooting, about how much footage is coming in a day, and how quickly are you able to churn through that, especially compared to, you hear about, like, when I listen to assistant editors talk about working on something like Star Wars, they're like, oh yeah, it takes me about a day to sync everything.
Right.
Which I'm like, that's not Final Cut for me, at least, but I want to hear from you guys. What does that look like?
Well, so I'll kick this off with a precursor. Something that we can also chat about is right after we got done working on this movie, Steven was whisked away and started working on The Banker, which had a huge affiliation and connection with Apple. And if you go over to Final Cut X's workflow page, their official workflow page on like how to do sexy workflows in Final Cut, Steven is on that page. Steven's face is on Apple's website, and he's talking about how so you can get what was the budget on Banker?
I believe it was somewhere between 9 and 12 million.
So he's got like around a 10 million version for you, and then ours was like under 5. So like, he scaled up, and I still haven't really even interfaced with Steven as much as I'd like to, and ask him all the questions about how the productions differ.
And Matt's Storf's done the $100 million level. So.
Yeah,
correct. Yeah,
that's he's kicking all our butts.
He's been sliding up and down all over that scale. But so on us, correct me if I'm wrong, Steven, we shot for 5 weeks, right? On Follow Me / No Escape. 1 week was on location, and then 4 weeks in a soundstage. And do you remember how many terabytes we were rocking at the end of that shoot? It was 2-cam. It was a 2-camera movie. Yeah. So it was red, raw, like 8K, 7K,
right.
Monstros. It was crazy.
One of the things I enjoy a lot about the teams I've gotten to work with, who are based in Final Cut, is they have like a gung-ho bravery about them. We're trying like something new on each of the films I've worked on, and Follow Me was no exception. 8K, multicam. at least 2 cameras running at a time, sometimes up to 7 or 8 cameras, not all of which are 8K. There were,
cell phones.
C300s all the way down to iPhones. I think I have folders for something like 11 cameras. I think per day we were shooting somewhere between a half terabyte and 2 terabytes because 8K Red Raw.
Right.
We had a 78 terabyte RAID. Well, we had 2 of them for offloading.
Redundancy.
And I think that was probably filled to about 70 or 80%, which is close to our math for that anyway.
Right.
So there was a lot of stuff coming in. What was the other part of your question, Bradley?
So yeah, I'm just like it's interesting to me because on these short productions, probably because we're trying to get through so many pages a day, 500 gigs is a half a terabyte is pretty low, and that's maybe even just be a single camera. We might be shooting up to about a terabyte, but it could be 4K ProRes, it could be 5 or 6K Red Raws. I don't think I've done 8K yet, but I think it's because we're just trying to churn with the shorter shooting schedule. We're trying to just churn through so many pages, right. And that's probably the difference. And it feels like, if you get like to the $100 million level, I wonder if in a way the spigot is going slower just because there's so many people, and there's every shot is just so carefully crafted that I wonder if there's just kind of a limit on just how much data you can really chew up. But still, you're telling me you get up to like what 11 cameras or something. Like it's
a lot.
That's an insane amount to manage, and then over time that's going to accumulate. Sorry, what was the size of the RAID again that you were working off of?
78.
Close to 80 terabytes, yeah.
Close to 80 terabytes, and you got nearly
2
full on that.
2 of them.
Yeah, it's about like 80%.
And just a reminder too, I know we mentioned in the last show this, but for anyone that's tuning in new, we had a collaboration with Apple where they lent us a bunch of iPhones for our actors. And they allowed us, it was like an exclusivity deal to use the iOS, shoot it on screen, no copyright infringement, weird issues, show the logo if we want, whatever. Right. And then when we were done, we shipped him a box of like shattered iPhones back, after this chaos of that production, and we were like, here you go. But like he would they would come in with the red cards, and he'd be throwing them. Hedge would be rocking and transferring stuff redundant, and then they'd bring in all these iPhones, and he'd be lightning cabling and like pulling shit off and throwing that into the the multicam of like, okay, during this scene, Cole's running down this hallway, and here's the phone footage of when he was holding his phone,
right?
And that's synced up, and here's Erin's perspective on her phone from down in the cell, and here's this, here's that. So.
What's the workflow like?
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
What's the workflow like for copying off an iPhone? I mean, do you guys? Do you have to get the phones, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I've noticed
we were airdropping, right?
We did in some cases. So what I've noticed is that I can't remember exactly, but I think at the time I had decided when it came to airdrop versus the Photos app versus image capture, I was getting, it felt like there were decisions being made for me, both with AirDrop and the Photos app. And so with image capture, if anybody shot something in a different frame rate by chance, I felt like I was getting a little bit more data out of it. I think if you go through AirDrop or Photos, if I'm not mistaken, certain things about your video may get committed that don't need to be, especially when it comes to slow motion clips. But also image capture gave me an extra sense of reliability because I could hook the phone up by a cable. In some cases these clips are quite long, so AirDrop is a little bit
flaky.
It's a little spotty. So offloading with a cable first and foremost, and then I think I went through image capture most of the time. There were some situations where we had to use AirDrop just because we were on the go.
Right.
But image capture behaved a little bit more like something I would expect to offload with. It gives me a list of what media is available. It actually gives me like an import function. It doesn't futz with the footage or the images itself. So I think that's what we were doing. But yeah, I mean, the bottleneck for all this stuff is you would think it's the data, and on some days it is just the bandwidth that it takes to offload for that many devices, or for singular devices that require that much saturation of your available ports. But I think almost as complicated is just fatigue. You know, you're tracking a ton of devices. I mean,
Steven's
I have, like,
bottleneck was that he didn't have a clone.
yeah. Like I
Right.
having a notebook next to me and like writing down, I mean, everything I could, and I would just like frantically writing pages, you know, just to keep track of what I had done. But there were so many cameras that I would just be, you know, it's not like 1 or 2 lines. It's like 11 lines worth of stuff to keep track of, and redundancy for just, you know, one offload. So
well, you know, on day one, the instructions are, all right, when we do this take, everyone, even though the phone's in your pocket, you're going to pull it out later in the scene, aim your phone at the clapper, get the sound sync. And you know, by like week 2, no one was doing that.
Right,
We're just rolling, and that plan went to shit. And then, you know, you've got to sync by audio only, and so Steven's trying to. I mean, he's trying to use the auto sync in Final Cut, but that breaks every now and then. And then he's trying to do the waveforms, and he's like bleeding out of his eyes trying to keep everything straight. And I was like, you need to go home. You need to go home right now.
So we had a comment talking about that. Do you enter in camera information that to help in the Final Cut Pro stage you're using keywords, etc. for metadata? Do you do that manually, or does it come in like with the iPhones automatically?
Red clips label themselves. They will let you know they're red clips. I do remember that. I think I did a little bit of extra detail for the red clips because we had different kinds of red cameras throughout the shoot. While it was mainly the helium, I think we also used a Starlit at some point. So I labeled those independently. But yeah, iPhone footage does not label itself. GoPro footage does not label itself. I had to do all that stuff manually, and I made a point to do that because I would make smart collections that would allow Cris to sort by camera.
Right.
Which allowed him to, you know, figure out. It's an easy way of determining like if something's going to be a POV shot, because if it's an iPhone, it's almost certainly going to be POV. Versus a red, which is almost certainly going to be something, you know, just more stereotypically cinematic, versus a C300, which he might know already is, you know, set up to be like a security camera or something like that. So labeling the cameras manually and meticulously, if they don't come in with a name, was a super important part of how we were doing things.
Now, did you tell everybody that were using an iPhone to hold it horizontally?
Yes.
Did they?
We tried. We tried.
There's definitely some vertical stuff in there, just because that's the typical like, what's up, like what, and like the vlogging kind of stuff, and that's just like the angle that is feeling a little more authentic, because people are rarely holding it horizontal for that perfect aspect ratio. I do want to reiterate, though, even though Steven touched on this before, the ease of editing once we did get through this workflow of me being able to be in the media browser and just typing in Cole iPhone and 2 clips pop up, drag. Wide shot, Aaron, prison cell. I was just typing intelligent keywords that he had trained me. You know, it was like on a sheet of like, these are the terms I'm using. Use these to search. So I wasn't opening, even though we had it separated by scenes, I wasn't opening this monstrous thing of looking at everything that was shot. I'm only typing in what I need. I know I need a close up on Cole for this reaction. Close, see you, Cole, you know, see you, comma, Cole. And then 3 clips pop up and they're all his close ups. Nothing was ever missing. So it's like you said, metadata was our boon to be able to move very quickly while we were editing.
Well, so that brings up a question for me. Was everything synced by multicam, or were you syncing to audio first so that you could just pull a certain angle with synced audio?
I think we had to do a mixture. So I know better now that I've had more experience. I think now I've learned that in the feature environment, it's probably just best to have multicam everything. It's an easy way to speed through color correction. It's an easy way to replace clips that you know, in a feature environment may have been recorded through a video tap or something like that. If you're shooting on film like we did on The Banker. but I think at the time for Follow Me, we pretty much just played it straight. I made multicams when we had multicam clips, and I synced clips when there was no alternate angle. But yeah, I've since tried to kind of improve on that strategy.
I guess, yeah, where I'm getting at is, say I wanted to look, if I had a multicam situation and I wanted to do a browser search for a specific camera angle, that I don't know if the multicam would pop up in that instance, and then I'd have to dig in further, or if I could just find that exact angle or clip. I mean, once it's in the timeline and you're just like, oh, I want to switch to Cole's iPhone right here, that's a pretty easy cut. So I just wondered how the searching was for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Chris may have to correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the struggles about working with multicam, a couple of the struggles that has to do with working with multicam, especially with such large footage.
Right.
You can't necessarily see both angles at the same time in the browser. I'm fairly certain the way we had set up the metadata made it so that if you type in like wide, the multicam clip, if it has a wide and a close-up, will still, show up in that list when you type wide. So the confusing part, though, becomes then which clip is active in the browser, because if you type wide and it shows a close-up, if our metadata is correct, Chris can trust that there is a wide in there, right? That's the value of the metadata when you're working with multicam. But yeah, does that sound right to you, Chris? I have to slow down because it's been like a couple of years now.
That was a confusing part. So Brad, I think you're correct in that, like, you're going to search for something, and a strangely odd looking result is going to pop up because it's in that thing, but you've got to dive into it to find it. It's not going to show exactly what you're looking for, or 50-50, you got lucky and it is the right camera. And then the other issue with like watching stuff, this is just an issue with multicam inherently, is as an editor, when you're watching it to find your selects and you're finding all the stuff that you like, I found it counterintuitive to be watching multicams because you get distracted. You're watching camera A and you're going through it and you're marking all your selects, and then you have to switch to camera. You've got to remember, there's another clip in here. So you switch to camera B and you make all your selects. And now you've got selects that are inside of a thing. And it got a little, I got worried that I was going to like lose treasures. Essentially. Right. I would see that multicam in my browser and it would have all the green finder lines, but it's for one of the cameras, not both. And it didn't. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, at a certain point, I think we were like, let's start doing A and B separately, so that I don't lose my favorites here, because I don't know. Does that make sense? Like,
yes, I know exactly what you're saying.
It got a little blurry in terms of like, I know how to use this system and make sure I'm favoriting on both angles, but I'm worried I'm going to forget about both angles when I'm going to pull selects.
Yeah, that part's coming back to me now. I think we had so for one take it would be a multicam, and then so say there's two cameras, then there would be two synced clips for one for A, one for B. And then we would use a smart collection to separate between multicam and synced clips so that he can choose which ones he would prefer to watch from, so he doesn't get confused. That now I remember. Yeah, I missed that.
Now, Stephen, did you organize in a Finder, I presume, before you imported into Final Cut?
I can only do that to a certain extent, right? Because red clips come with sidecar files and all sorts of other things. I prefer when it comes to projects like this to just leave it, category and shooting day, and then camera, and that's hopefully as complicated as it gets. Obviously, and then another folder for the roll.
Right.
But beyond that, we did not do any additional Finder level organization. If this were a smaller project or something that wasn't with cinema cameras, I would do additional work to get keywords at the Finder level. But for something like this, I think it was important to preserve all the hierarchies of these files.
Right. So how did you import the footage then? Did you use Final Cut to import it, or did you use Kino or something else?
We did go straight into Final Cut. Yeah, this was actually, now that 10.4.9 has been released, I guess this would be the dark ages now, where you have to, if you want your proxy media, that was something we definitely grappled with in our first week, was trying to keep up with transcoding proxies for 8K, ingesting directly into Final Cut because we can't do them with a third
Well, and
party.
also, was this at a time before, because the Red cameras also switched their own camera system so that you could record, like I did a feature film, and Patrick, when he did Faith-Based, where we were recording it on the Red in RAW, but also HD ProRes files that we would cut from. So was this before that capability was in the Red cameras? Like you had 8K, but you didn't have the ability to record ProRes at the same time?
I think we had the ability, but that we weren't sure that the proxies would come online in a way that we expected, and we actually may have been wrong about that. I know that there's some pretty robust relinking between Red originals and proxies that just isn't like super. There's not a lot of documentation on it, I guess is what I would say, because it's an exclusion, right? Like it's an exception, right? Like no other in-camera proxies work like that in Final Cut, at least at the time, where there's a pretty flawless relinking ability.
Well, you talk about the dark ages. What Patrick and I had to do on the films we worked on was just bring in the ProRes files as camera originals, and then relink before handing the project over for finishing, or if you had to like do a visual effects shot or something like that. The issue that Patrick came across, which fortunately I did not, was that sometimes the ProRes proxies recorded in camera would be a few frames different, and Final Cut didn't want to relink them.
Right.
I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't have to deal with that, where you'd probably have to go back and then manually cut in the original. But it sounds like you just did original media as the Red RAW, didn't record any ProRes in camera, and then did you generate proxies? Like, would they have been 4K proxies through Final Cut, or did you do a hacky proxy workflow?
Yeah, we had a drive just for proxies because of that, right? We don't get to choose, at least with that version of Final Cut, you don't get to choose your resolution, you don't get to choose anything that might indicate a lower bandwidth or anything. So yeah, I think it's just 50% and ProRes proxy. So even with that, I think we had to have an 8 terabyte drive just for proxies.
The proxies were huge, yeah.
So
we were on 2 iMac Pros, so I mean, working with those proxies was buttery smooth, and it was fine, but the amount of space they took up was still huge.
So do we even know with 1049 what the criteria is to relink a proxy that Final Cut didn't make? Does it have the same name?
So you just select the media, and then you just say, yeah, you have to have the same name. Although we've determined, I think, that you can have an appendage to the name.
Yes, but it has to have the same audio channels, has to be the same frame, or it has to be what other criteria for it to relink? I don't even know.
If I'm not mistaken, it is same audio configuration, same number of channels, and same time code, and then same duration. I believe those are the 3 magic variables.
Although Patrick, I think when he was on your show last week, said that the proxies can be a few frames different, and it doesn't.
The new with 1049.
Yeah, it doesn't in the world.
It's not quite so fussy, and I was wondering about the name. That was one of the things I was, concerned about. Do I have to rename everything exactly the same, but apparently not.
So probably need the first part of the same first name, and then if you wanted to tag proxy at the tail of it, I think that's fine.
So what do you guys think about 1049? Have you used it yet? I know Brad has.
Who wants to go first?
I haven't had an opportunity to use it yet because I'm on another project, and I don't want to upgrade mid-project, so I'm waiting to do that.
I have it downloaded. I've experimented with it, and I've tried doing some tests with it. I haven't yet done a project with it. I helped somebody else set up their project with it the other day, just over screen sharing. It seemed to be working fine. I do notice just some little interface things here and there, especially like I think when the dialog box for moving things between libraries, where it gives you that new fancy set of radio buttons to choose if you're going to bring media over, proxy media, no media.
Right.
I do remember now, I think if you click on one of these things, a bunch of stuff shifts over to the right as some of your options disappear. So like little things like that, I'm sure they'll smooth out. But I'm excited for it. I mean, this opens up I mean, if we had this on
right, exactly. Everything I've worked on, if I had
a lot
it,
of stress.
yeah.
This seems to be the trend where you do a project just before the feature you needed is released, and then it comes out months after you do the movie, and then rinse and repeat, and that just happens forever. It's like you never have the key feature you needed back in time. It's very frustrating.
Well, this is kind of a plug for the Creative Summit, but some of these things, like the way proxy workflow works, I remember having a conversation specifically with an Apple engineer, and the question came up, well, if you're generating proxies, because I said the percentage thing would be fine, 50, 25, whatever, that's fine. But what you really need, because you, like in the case of your guys' movie, you've got C300s, you've got, Red Raw, you've got iPhones, and everything is going to be at a different, different resolution, maybe a different aspect ratio. And you really want to be able to generate proxies that are all kind of the same size. And this is where the question came up of, well, if everything's going to be like 1920, how are you going to handle the anamorphic squeezing or stretching? Is it going to stretch weird? And my answer was to the engineer, and I'm sure other people said this, and maybe they were already thinking this, but I was pleasantly surprised to see there. I'm like, oh no, just like compressor, do up to X resolution. Of course, one of my suggested resolutions was 720p, which did not make it in there, unfortunately. But if you really want to do that, this is where I thought the other brilliant thing was the fact that you can make them, and you can link proxies made in another application like compressor. And then the other huge thing in compressor for me is you can bake in LUTs in compressor as well. So now you could have proxy media that has a LUT baked in, and you don't have to fuss with editors getting confused and sending you rough cuts that have mixed log footage and Rec 709 footage, which just always drives me up the wall.
Does 1049 allow burn-ins over proxies where you can put information like time code and
you could do it in, you could do that in compressor. Or another app, like if you ran it through Resolve.
Okay.
Not if you're generating proxies in Final Cut.
Okay.
But I would just pull your media through Resolve or Compressor or another application, and you could burn in whatever you want in the proxy.
Make a droplet. I have a droplet for Compressor for time code burn-ins. So do you think the proxy workflow in 1049, that certainly has helped with Hollywood adoption of Final Cut, hasn't it? It's got to be one of the biggest things. I mean, what I mean is the way they look at Final Cut. Doesn't that help?
I would say you probably can't see the meter moving, but for anyone who's already using it, this is an extra sort of argument in their back pocket for if they're going to try and convince someone to allow them to use it for a larger project. There is still one I would say concern that someone who's in the know might have, which is that this is all awesome. It's extremely helpful, but there's one situation that is excluded with the current feature set, which is one where you receive the proxies first. So if you are sent the proxies via Aspera or whatever it may be, I think what's sort of been making its way around Twitter now is that it's been confirmed by a few people that unless you have your original footage already on hand, you can't tell Final Cut that the other footage is in fact a proxy. That original footage has to be there in order for it to categorize the two of them as separate entities. So if you receive the proxy footage first, you actually don't have the option of assigning it as proxy footage.
You need import as proxy. It's funny you should say this because I haven't been on the Twitter sphere looking at this, but it has been keeping me up at night.
Yeah.
What if I want to send something over Frame.io and download it as a proxy into a new library, but I don't have the original media? I can't do that.
So actually, so there are some exceptions, right? And I think Frame.io might actually be one of the exceptions because if you upload your originals to Frame.io, Frame.io's workflow extension actually does have the capability of exchanging XML 1.9 behind the scenes. And so that's the one way that you can actually tell Final Cut that it is that to import as proxy. So Frame.io can do that. So if you upload your originals and have Frame.io transcode all the different frame sizes and proxies for you, if you open up your workflow extension and try and do an import, you can tell it import the proxies. Frame.io will do the work. It'll assign it as a proxy before you have your originals in the library. So what I'm hoping is what I'm ultimately hoping is that we get an import as proxy, yes, natively. But what I'm also hoping is that between Compressor and other transcoding apps, that there will also be some sort of just a checkbox you can click to export a Final Cut XML that tells it this group of footage needs to be imported as a proxy. Just something that's automated. You hit go on your batch, and it just dumps a Final Cut XML in there into that folder, the destination folder. So that's what I'm hoping for. But that being said, not everybody needs that. I can't imagine. There's a certain level of you're juggling with every budget on a film, and you don't always know if they're going to have access to Wi-Fi that's robust enough to get you a whole day's worth of proxies. So in most cases, you may just receive them on a drive together to begin with. So this only excludes a certain percentage of workflows, and even then there's a workaround, I'm sure.
Or you make sure you have someone on set that can set up the project before handing it off as a proxy project. But yeah, I agree. Import is proxy, and the big thing I throw at the Frame.io solution is just, well, you need a really expensive plan of Frame.io if you're going to be running a feature through there.
And a lot of bandwidth.
And a lot of bandwidth.
Which is never available on set. You never have good internet on set. It's just not a thing. You always think you will, and then you don't.
Hopefully 5G will help in the future, but I think that'll be a while before we can really rely on that.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the proxy workflow. I understand when you initially make proxies, you have to have the original media. But if I make a proxy-only library, I can't send that to somebody else. They have to have the original media too?
No. Once you've made the library, that's why I'm saying a little checkbox for an XML would be a solution through Compressor or Resolve or something. Because you can definitely send a library to somebody and it's linked only to the proxies. That's
what I thought, yeah. Otherwise, it would be kind of...
Well, so in that situation, though, you've already told Final Cut that there are originals. That's why that situation, that context still works. That's totally fine.
Absolutely. So I have a question. First off, you guys were all at the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit last year, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Everybody. Chris has been there a few years. Stephen, have you been there before? 2 years? Last 2 years, or?
Yeah, 2 years. I did a presentation on this workflow, the Follow Me workflow, in 2018, and then in 2019 I came back again to do a presentation on the Bankers workflow.
That's right. You were there 2 years ago. Was with Mike, right? Mike Matzdorf. You and Mike Matzdorf.
Yes, the three of us. Yeah, well, the four of us. I think Will was there as well. Yeah.
I have video of that presentation. I taped, behind the scenes, the crowds and everything. I just taped snippets and all that. So I have some of that stuff.
We played like a little teaser that.
Exactly.
And then we chatted not only about workflow, but one of the components of the workflow was we did a center extraction, which was huge for the director because he was wanting to be able to manipulate the frame and redo things. So we had I think we shot 8K, but we did a 7K extraction, right?
Right.
So we had a 1K buffer around the image where we could kind of slide and maneuver and zoom quite a bit without losing any fidelity.
But that's nice though. When I shoot, I'm shooting 4K and for years, and I like that because everything is 1080p. Right. I have a lot of leeway to zoom around. And then on my GH5, it actually shoots 5K internally, but it's 4:3.
Right.
So you have to have more options.
That's an interest. The center extraction thing's interesting because there's a new feature that I wonder if it would help or not, which is the custom overlays where you could create an overlay and bring that
right
up.
Into that. Yeah, I played around with it. I have only one complaint. I think it is useful, but you certainly have to consider it way ahead of time as a part of your plan. So The one limitation that I found is that you can't export with the overlay. So so if you're editing with the overlay,
this is a new
the
Final Cut feature
1049 where you
yeah
can see the image, but it's like in a darkened, kind of like when you do photo on an iPhone, you can see what's around the outside. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can essentially like import a matte and assign it as a matte that you can turn on and off and change its opacity.
Right.
So
but then to export, you just have to drop something over the whole timeline anyway, if you wanted to.
So, and yes, you can't crop to what's visible inside the matte. You can't export with the matte on. So it's definitely helpful, but I still am trying to think about which ways in which it would be best used, because you don't want to have, like, even in this film, right? If we have 8K footage and we know we're going to do a 7K extraction, does that mean we still edit in an 8K timeline and just leave everything out on the phrase? Would it? I mean, it still might seem better to just edit in a 7K sequence and set it to fill, set all the footage to fill, so that I can actually export that way, whether it be for test screenings or for purposes.
Yeah.
So it can be useful, but I'm still trying to figure out how to maximize it.
Yeah. Well, and I think the whole purpose of the overlay was just so that if you were going to crop to, say, Instagram or vertical, aspect ratios, then you could place all your graphics ahead of time so they don't get cropped outside when you change the timeline, which I've actually already used that smart conform feature for a music video I edited. It's like, I want to put it on Instagram. I want to put it on, this place. So I made 3 versions really quickly, and there was still a bit of nudging I had to do with the reframing, but that was an interesting thing. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, I got a request for 2 films that I was finishing this year, where they wanted I ended up not delivering it because it was kind of like it said it was required, but then when I pushed on it, they said they didn't really have to have it. But it was basically, these films were shot at the 2:39:1 aspect, and they, like, one of them on anamorphic lenses, the other one was just cropped. And then they wanted to one of the delivers they wanted was like a regular 16:9 aspect, and I was thinking, well, maybe this smart conform is a quick way to take a project, say, you've done your resolve export, but you've got all the individual clips. Maybe that's another actual feature film kind of reason to do that. I haven't tested that yet. Like I said, when I pushed on it, and 1049 wasn't out yet, but I pushed back and said, why do you need that? Like, oh, well, just in case a foreign broadcaster.
Just in
I'm
case.
Like, can you
find out,
let us know if that actually happens?
Right.
and then we'll worry about that. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. So I didn't do it, but now I'm like, then that came out, and I'm like, oh, well, I could test this feature.
Yeah, I mean, you could also use it for custom frame guides, right? Like if there is something about your project that demands an extra sort of level of accuracy or attention to where things are on the screen, whether it be titles or some way a character is framed up to match a different thing, maybe matching scenes in such a way so that a transition looks very similar or plays to the visual component in a specific way, that might be helpful there as well. Like, it doesn't need to necessarily be the most straightforward way that we're thinking of it, like a center extraction or reframing.
Right.
Well, I have a perfect example of that. So the feature film I'm doing right now is a romantic comedy. It's 2 people mostly FaceTiming, and there's some phone calls and stuff. And I'm trying to figure out what layouts I want to do. And sometimes in order to get them the same size, I have to reframe them a little bit. And I was like, after I get through the rough cut, which should be in the next day or so, I actually want to make a bunch of custom overlays once I kind of decide on the layout, to just, if I have a side by side, or I have a picture in picture, that there's some consistency with the layouts, as opposed to just, I kind of moved it down to the bottom right, now this one's down to the bottom left. Are they actually the exact same size? Because I'm having to rescale and reframe each picture in picture kind of customly. So this overlays was a thought that I had, to just be able to quickly toggle that on and make sure that they're in the actual right spot and the right scale.
So Apple has already announced that there's going to be a silicon Mac. They said singular initially at the end of this year. Do you think they would release that silicon Mac without updating Final Cut Pro? Do you think they would just release the silicon Mac and just use 10.4.9, or do you think they have something else in mind when that first silicon Mac comes out?
Well, I guess that depends on whether or not 10.4.9's underpinnings already support Big Sur. So
right. Well, Universal 2 is supposed to be Intel and Silicon both. I haven't been able to confirm whether that's the case with the version that's on the App Store. I'm sure there's a beta. There's betas, but I haven't been able to.
They announced yesterday Big Sur is supposed to come out in the next day or so.
It is?
I think it's come. Oh, right. Not sorry. I was thinking iOS comes out today.
Yeah, 10.14.
iOS, but Big Sur.
Not Big Sur. Sorry. No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's what it was. I heard Tim Cook say we're updating all our operating
I know,
systems.
but and
then the
say
second
Big
part of
Sur.
that was for iPad, and I'm like,
I was seeing Twitter's on fire right now because apparently when Tim Cook said that was the first that developers were hearing that they have a day to package their apps and get them published.
Yeah.
And then the GIF was just Tim Cook and the sunglasses coming down. It says deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Smiling, it's like deal with it.
They said usually they have a week. Which
usually
still
they have a week, but he was like, it's coming out tomorrow, and all the developers like had strokes.
Well, it's a good question. Chris Hawking may know. I don't know, but he seems to dive into some of the code stuff like he's not supposed to. But the question is if it is, because when they demoed at WWDC, they demoed Final Cut running on Silicon.
Right.
They showed that feature that we already have, which is the smart conform to different aspect ratios. So I don't know. I would think that there's going to be a universal, and they'll tell us and they'll stamp it as a universal like 10.5 or something application, because that's what they had to do. But I think it was Final Cut Pro. Was Final Cut Pro 5 or 6 the first universal version between the Power PC and the Intel Switch? The older copies of Final Cut wouldn't run on the Intel machines.
Right, but it took a couple years to transition over, right? They didn't do it overnight.
Yeah, so I mean, they showed it running at WWDC, so I'm sure there's something in beta, but I don't know if
I realized that, as a matter of fact, we got a comment. It says, Philip Hodgett says 10.4.9 is the Intel Apple Silicon release. There is no other. That's not the question. The question is, when they release a new Silicon Mac, are they going to use the ARM Mac? Are they going to use the old 2 or 3 month old version of Final Cut Pro 10.4.9 for that Mac, or are they going to have a new version?
That might be the answer to the question, because if Phil Podgett is saying it's an Intel and Silicon release, then 10.4.9 will work on an Apple Silicon machine, which means we likely won't see a new version of Final Cut when they release the new machine at the end of the year.
But why not? Why wouldn't you have a new Silicon Mac and a new version of Final Cut to run on it at the same time? Otherwise, it's just playing something that's 2 or 3 months old.
Well, if it's a MacBook Air, that doesn't
that's true.
Sell copies of Final Cut.
That's true. It's probably going to be the Mac Mini. They're just going to take those Mac Minis from the developers, put a new chip in it, and ship them right back out again.
I would imagine too, like a large point release like that, like 10.4.5, or not 10.4, sorry, 10.5. 10.5 would be like a huge feature set addition, like a massive change where like collaboration is introduced. I don't think it would just be like
it better be
rules and collaboration, but
yeah.
10.5 better be huge, because 10.4 is now this fall is going to be 33 years old. The oldest of any version of Final Cut.
If Final Cut 10 ever wants to really be considered as a serious player in the Hollywood situation, it's never going to happen without collaboration.
Well, I have a question about that. So, how do you see remote workflows changing some of that, and the fact that like Frame.io and Final Cut's remote workflow is a really good collaboration development? Do you think that, in the past it was like everybody's on the same server at the same place, opening up the same Avid bins? I I'm sure there's a hope that's going to come back, but do you think that post workflow is going to it'll just be more standard to be a little more remote? I mean, you obviously want to work with your directors and producers in person, but that's a little different.
Yeah, I think we're going to be, I mean, right now, nothing has been decided, for example, at Warner Brothers, but I know that they're planning on returning to offices sometime in the first quarter of next year. They've been extremely diligent and careful about making sure that they don't move too early and cause, undue like health concerns and whatever.
Sure.
And so they're being really careful about that. But to answer your question, I think from this point on, moving forward in history, this is going to be this pandemic is going to be a ripple that just echoes through time, and it's going to affect remote workflows forever. And remote workflows are going to become a new standard that is no longer frowned upon when you apply for work. I think like we're going to see a weird situation where, studios are going to be conducting interviews and half of them are going to be over Skype or over Zoom, and they're going to consider someone that doesn't work local. Like before, they wouldn't have even considered some random person living in Massachusetts or something like that, right?
Or
but
Utah.
Now, Utah, exactly. But like with more services and getting installed, I just saw Google Fiber is upping their speeds to 2 gigs down, still 1 up. And so with these crazy internet speeds, and now with 5G becoming a little bit widely more, active, I think, remote workflows are going to be a new normal. And if you can get away with that, my issue though, with right now, it's only due to the pandemic. Some people love working from home. I really do not enjoy it. I like having that separation between work and home. Well, when the two blend together, it's quite frankly a bit of a nightmare. Like,
no, I understand. Yeah,
but say you could be in Massachusetts or Utah or whatever, you could still open up an office, right? Oh, totally. Where you're working away from home. Maybe you have 2 or 3 people working with you. I guess the question is, I think there's an opportunity, because one of the things that we've been talking about with Final Cut for years is if Final Cut does collaboration, it should do it differently than Avid. But of course, in the Hollywood workflow, like when Resolve and Adobe and Blackmagic have addressed this issue, they're like, we need to kind of parody what people are familiar with. But I think the remote workflow situation gives you some leeway or an excuse that if Final Cut's going to up the game in the collaboration, which it should do, that this is an opportunity to leapfrog the older systems and do it in a way that benefits both the local server and the remote working situation. So I'm not disagreeing that it needs it, but I also think there's an opportunity for it to justifiably do it differently, and that not to be just like the magnetic timeline. People are like, oh, that's really weird. It's like, oh, I could see the advantage of this Final Cut solution because it handles, this integration with Frame.io or whatever else. I think there's an opportunity is all I'm saying.
Well, there's. Oh, go ahead.
How about I'll let you finish your statement, because I'm going to veer it off in a slightly different direction.
Well, the 2 things I was going to say to consider, one is that there is Hollywood is definitely, I mean, on the larger Hollywood productions and big, AAA, like huge budget movies, those are really like governed by an older generation of Avid editors that are kind of set in their ways, and they do things in that way, and they've been used to doing that forever. I think this remote workflow situation might purge a lot of that and usher in a new era of people that are a little more savvy with technology, a little more savvy with remote workflow stuff. These studios might end up because these people, they want to go into their office and they want to be able to do things in the way they've known them to be, and they're not going to want to adapt. Some will and some won't. And I think the people that don't adapt might end up getting phased out as we kind of live in this new strange climate that we're in, which is what I said earlier about adaptability. The other thing to consider here is that this could also greatly impact the climate of how much work is available in Los Angeles and other like-minded places, where the job market is either going to seriously decline or seriously grow, depending on how we're able to produce. Because right now you can't even be on set without these stringent protocols about wearing masks and being socially distanced. That's going to impact the efficiency of how sets operate. That's going to affect how many productions are being made and at scale. I think the amount of content we're used to going on Netflix and 20 new shows come out every week. I think that's going to plummet pretty quickly. I think networks are going to start running out of material soon, and so it's going to be a very interesting situation where there's going to be less content and more people that are rising to the challenge of being able to adapt it in these kinds of ways.
Well, in the same time, like the little shoot I did is a perfect example of new content you can create where you really scale it down. And if there is a void and hunger for it, I could see more micro budget production things that pop up and opportunities there. So it's very interesting. I think early on, I compared it to like the asteroid coming and wiping out the dinosaurs and all the small mammals are flourishing.
Right.
Because I've been so busy
right.
in ways that I haven't been for years, just because there's like this, we got to get our film out because, people actually want this content now, where a year ago it's like anybody could go out and shoot, and now it's there's a benefit to kind of the lower budget. Temporarily, I want the bigger budget stuff to come back. But
piggybacking off of that, we're literally seeing that with this release of No Escape and Follow Me is the only reason we are in so many theaters right now. And the only reason this movie is getting as big of a release is because we're in this pandemic. The theaters literally don't have content to show. These giant movies like Mulan got pushed to Disney Plus, Tenet got delayed, all these huge movies, it's out now, but like delay, and these theaters are starving. They need content. They're reopening to better or worse, and maybe that's a terrible idea, but these people, they need stuff to show, and that's when our movie, we came in with a silver platter, and we were like, it's prepared. Here's the DCP. Here are all the deliverables. We have a movie. Would you like to show it? And a lot of the theaters said yes. So this is, again, what you just said. We are now flourishing because of this meteor strike, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm reading some of the notes here. It says it's been released in 12 countries so far. Gross to date is 2.7 million, which is fantastic. Right?
Incredible.
It says 300,000 have seen it in theaters so far. Biggest territory is Germany, opening at number 2. And it says 85,000 tickets sold. And opening number 1 in Lithuania.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is a random stat, but it was pretty funny. Crushing it in Lithuania right now, just absolutely crushing it.
Yes, yeah.
Steve, you had a thought?
When we were
talking about workflows.
Yep.
And collaboration.
So I have a unique perspective on this because I'm currently, since I'm between features, I'm day playing at a place that does a lot of social media content. I was brought in to help them with their Final Cut pipeline and try and kind of hone in on their assistant work and see if we could improve on things. And I've been with them for close to 8 months. And I think the first 2 months were when they were still in the office before everything shut down. And once they did shut down, we took some time to wait and see what happened. But then we were able to move to a remote workflow, probably with a lot less effort than you would. I mean, it's still, something that we had to think quite a lot about and make sure we did our research. But there's a way forward, and it was clear, at least in our case. So what we ended up doing is working with PostLab and PostLab Drive, which for anybody who doesn't know yet what that is, PostLab itself is an app that sort of works as a library checkout system for project files. And PostLab Drive is a sort of companion to that app. It's a sort of a built-in access to a remote server. And to my surprise, this has been working out pretty great because that remote server can act as centralized storage. Technically, you can edit from it if you create proxies that are lightweight enough. And
sure.
It's recommended that, if you're going to try and do this, you'd be on Ethernet, something I've been trying to get my editors onto. But that mixed with working drives, local working drives for each of the editors that I'm setting up, has made a pretty robust remote system already. The only thing I've been struggling personally with as an assistant or with someone who's trying to manage different kinds of workflows as we go forward has been just plugins. And we've tried to sort of explore things like ArcX. ArcX has actually been quite a great help. We'll take an XML from a library and fish out fonts, motion templates, and other kinds of things that might be useful for onlining on a different system. It doesn't work perfectly, I would say, this idea of working remote and using ArcX to move things over between different machines, but it does work pretty well. But all things considered, in a Final Cut, or I guess even in a Premiere scenario, PostLab Drive, and Frame.io really do offer like a working way forward, something that is functional and that you can pick up pretty quickly. Surprisingly, our uploads to PostLab Drive are pretty robust as well. Like, we haven't had a whole lot of problems with that. But yeah, I mean, like, between that and TeamViewer, everything's been quite good, to be honest. I mean, we do have little hiccups here and there, but I don't know if you could move a large Avid production into a remote space this quickly, or with these kinds of tools. Like, does the infrastructure exist yet?
Well, what's funny is, one thing I'll just say on that is, I was watching the Frame.io workflow from home series.
Yeah.
And there were several times, and even on some live streams that Michael Cioni did, where he mentioned, no, Frame.io's not integrated with Avid. We'd love to be integrated with Avid if Avid's listening. No, it's not. That question kept popping up because in that case, I think you had some serious industry professionals watching and commenting, and it just came up again and again that they were not able to move. And I don't think it's a lack of Avid not wanting to work with Frame.io, but it kind of goes back to what Chris was talking about, where you've got this old guard of people, and change is a scary thing to mention, and they don't want to learn something new. They don't want to deal with it. And then, but like I said, I think it's wonderful, because then it creates an opportunity to say that doesn't work, but this does. And I don't know as far as Avid's little interplay system or how that works with, like, could you set up a remote server and have a bunch of Avid editors log in remotely? I wouldn't know
there
that.
I suppose there is Bebop technology from.
Yep.
I know Michael Comas is talking a lot about it. He's been really informative. But I also do understand that, especially right now, as it's sort of an emerging technology and an emerging strategy, it's still not. There's a higher bar of entry, at least cost-wise, financially.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. I'm actually really excited about that. I know right now they can't run Final Cut because I don't think that macOS is
can't be virtualized. That's the problem.
It's prohibited.
So they could do it, but they'd have to buy a bunch of special Macs that they run Final Cut off of remotely, as opposed to the other systems, which they can just load anything onto their kind of virtual machines, and then you can edit on whatever remotely.
So I am curious to see what that brings. But it is really interesting, to me at least, that, you know, between Final Cut and all these different services now, that pretty quickly there was a way forward without a whole lot of adaptation. And it's becoming even better every day. I mean, with Frame.io's recent release and PostLab Drive's recent announcements, there's some additional functionality that makes collaboration at the Finder level especially a lot easier. Just transporting media back and forth between different departments, not having to upload things to multiple services, but just to one, and handing out links rather than providing people access to everything that you have. So the more flexibility we see with each of these components, the further we get into, you know, keeping this as a potential and robust option going forward, even as things open up, whatever that may be.
How many employees are at your place?
Well, employees is probably different than posts, right? So I think employees is like a total of 30-ish people, but post is currently like, I think they have about 3 editors who are permanent, and then myself and another assistant, and they have another 3 editors who are on contract right now. So I think and then a couple producers and things like that. So there's probably close to a dozen of us who need to access data regularly that have to do with the edit.
So the Final Cut Pro Creator Summit this year is virtual, as could be predicted. It's called the Final Cut FCPX Global Summit. Now, that was pretty predictable because, I mean, you figured there was no notice, over the summer so people could book hotels and book airfare. But what I find interesting is Apple is presenting.
Oh, good.
They're going to be presenting. Now, is Apple just going to come on there and just say, hey, here's 10.4.9 in November?
It's not like they haven't done it before.
Hey.
You don't want to travel all the way to Cupertino to go to their gift shop?
Yeah, that was a historic cafe that we all got to be in.
I always enjoy.
Steve Jobs used to eat there.
But no, I understand that maybe that's happened in the past, but the other times, I mean, what are they going to present? I mean, I guess they could show the Silicon Mac or a preview of something, which is what I'm hoping for.
Well, tied into this whole pandemic thing, we were talking about how much we love the fact that proxy workflow finally came to us the way we wanted, and I think about that priority list of features that they want to add in Final Cut. I don't know if it's a whiteboard or a shared document. I certainly haven't seen it, obviously, but I'm sure that when the pandemic hit, I'm not sure, but I would guess that the proxy workflow moved up to the top of that list. And I'm hoping that collaboration that we've been talking about a lot got bumped up as well. Because obviously it didn't become just a hypothetical, well, that would be nice. It became no, we definitely need this, especially now. The proxy workflow thing is huge with being able to collaborate remotely and some sort of robust collaboration feature set beyond just integration with Frame.io would also be a huge need. And
just to elaborate on collaboration too, for anyone who's watching that might be like, what exactly are we meaning by collaboration? We're not talking about two people editing and splicing away and cutting on the same timeline. That would be madness. We're talking about collaboration that is in the similar vein of what has always been available in something like Avid, which is simply that, like, as an editor, I could theoretically be in a timeline cutting and working while Steven is in the media browser organizing metadata and creating bins and doing shit. And so, like, things are being built and organized and structured on the side while I'm editing over here. And as long as we're not in our separate playpens, then we're good. But we can't ever be existing in the exact same, thing. And so if you keep very, very basic collaboration, I mean, bin locking, it's like whatever we got to do to get that live, and then some kind of internal chat client where there, it could just be this little bouncing box and it's like Steven, and then you click on it. He's like, hey, scene 609 is ready for you. And I go, cool. And it flies away.
Right.
It's just very simple. And like, we could just start with a basic build and then we could enhance on that. But it's just something.
So
like
I've always seen it as, and this is a rabbit hole I don't want to get too deep into, but
too late.
If
you've got separate libraries, like Steven has a library, you have a library, but he's organizing something in an event that he's able to, like, similar to like AirDrop, he's able to drag that into your library. Boom, it pops up and like, oh great, and you're able to import it, or you say save for later. And then if he needs something from you, you've got permissions set up for your events, and he can look at that and he can grab those things and move it to his library. Like, I'm just trying to think in the existing Final Cut structure, what's a way to do that without everything breaking. And to me, that would be the nice solution is just kind of the dragging in and out and little pop-up that says, Steven wants to share this with you. And you're like, accept, reject.
And that would have to come with some serious back-end security protocols of making sure that, by having you infinitely increase the possibility of human error by introducing collaboration and the possible deletion of things and like accidents galore. So I get it. It's difficult. You got to be careful how this is installed. You can't just put it in there willy-nilly, but at the same time, it would be a huge boon to productivity.
Yeah, that's why I say the accept. He's bringing you a new event, and you're like, I'm going to accept that change. I'm going to decline that. I'm going to save that for later.
Right.
And that gives, and then again, you've set up so it's like I've given this user access to see things in this event. You definitely need all those permissions and controls in place, and it starts to hurt your brain when you think about it too much. But that's where when you talked about editors in the same timeline, it's like, yeah, in Keynote or Pages, you can do that. It can also be really maddening. I was working with Chuck Braverman on some stuff earlier this year, and we were developing. You guys know Chuck? Anybody?
I know who he is. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I know the name.
So he I was opening in Pages, and I was in like a collaboration mode where it was like striking out things when you hit delete, and he was getting really frustrated. We eventually got through it, but I'm like, imagine that on a timeline where it's like, why did you delete that clip? Why did you do that?
Right.
Definitely drive you crazy. Anyway.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Stephen.
I think on the topic of hoping that Apple's reprioritizing based off of what's happening, I think that I personally hope that I would imagine that collaboration is already pretty high on the list, and they're solving that puzzle, but that that COVID-19 sort of forces them to rethink how they implement this and to prepare for a situation that isn't just local, but that is flexible enough to be remote, and to accommodate for poor internet bandwidth and to accommodate for all the other things that all of us are struggling with. And maybe that's a super tall order, but I do hope that those questions are posed just as a starting place, because they may spur some other really interesting ideas and new takes on this. But yeah, that's we've probably gone too far down that rabbit hole.
Well, the thing about the Creative Summit and Apple presenting, I'm not sure if it's going to be two-way communication during the presentation or not. But since we're not going to be there in person, it's only $199 this year, and you get to see all the sessions, and you can watch the sessions afterwards if you missed some, up to 90 days or something. But I don't know if Apple's is going to be two-way, like the rest of them are probably going to be. You can do Q&As. Apple's might just be strictly a presentation.
Yeah, would be fun because, like I said, I think, the proxy workflow, that question came up of, well, how do we do that? And I said to an engineer up to, and again, I'm not going to take credit for the idea. I just know that I voiced my opinion on it and it was there. Makes me happy. How do we replicate that at an event now, where before I could walk up to somebody who worked from Apple and start a conversation, or introduce somebody to somebody else? At least if we could have that session that we had the last 2 years, where it was kind of a closed lip, hey, we don't want you guys repeating anything, but you're going to submit your questions, and we're going to talk about the product in an open and honest way about the development and everything. And it wasn't like, here's the secrets of where it's going, but it was more of a real conversation where they were able to get real with us. I would love for that to be part of the Creative Summit lineup.
I'm not sure how they would do that, though.
But it's same. So we submit questions ahead of time. You're in a Creative Summit attendee.
Right.
You submit the questions. Now, we may not have. Maybe there's a live chat going on or something during it, and they're streamed.
No, I understand. I'm talking about the NDA part.
Oh, we didn't sign NDAs for that, though.
Well, for that presentation, it was understood no photography, no videotaping, no audio recording, no discussion of what's in this room for the next hour. That was made pretty clear both times.
Right, but I don't think we actually. It was more like we're going to trust you guys.
No,
at least the first time.
I'm not sure how they would do that
So
online.
you're worried, like, what's to stop somebody from recording that on their own computer?
Exactly. I don't think that'll happen. There's always be somebody that'll.
If you're an attendee and you're signed, I'm sure they could still make you sign things. So you upload that video.
How do you spell your name, Brad? Let me see how you spell your name. Bradley Olson.
What if Apple's presentation is like their Time Flies live event from yesterday? It's a pre-recorded, like, super fancy, and they're like, what's up, Creative Summit? Check that. Boom, 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 it's flying through the campus, and you're just like, oh my god! Like, what if it's just a video
we expect more meat. You know, not just. I mean, I like those presentations they've been doing the last couple, WWDC and this one. Yeah. But, you know, we expect something else a little bit more. I mean, because they've introduced 10.3 at the Creative Summit, 10.4 at the Creative Summit, 10.4.4 at the Creative Summit. The other two major updates were around NAB. I'm not saying they're going to, but they certainly can show us something. So are we thinking 10.5 in 2021 at this point?
I don't know.
Well, if it's not 2021, then that means Final Cut Pro 10.4 is going to be 4 years old. So, I mean, it's got to be, come on.
And I know that you've been pointing out, like, Richard, you mentioned many times, it's been so long since 10.4 came out, but this has been the most, I know there's been some dry spells periods, but in terms of pro workflow, this has been the most robust development of Final Cut that we've seen since the beginning, you know, especially this 10.4.9.
Yeah, 10, yes. Like, 10.4.4 and 10.4.9 were gigantic. Both of them were big.
There was even between 10.4.4 and 10.4.9.
Well, the Metal 2.
There was not the Metal 2 update, but NAB, I think, is when they introduced like closed caption workflow and some of the other.
That was before 10.4.4. That was 10.4.
Oh, okay.
10.4. That was, yeah.
I'm getting
something around. It was. Absolutely.
But there's definitely been, in terms of features, there's been including 10.4, there's been like 3 updates that have been really significant in terms of workflow. And last year's Metal update is appreciated, even though it's not a robust feature update. So yeah. I don't know. I've really loved kind of living here for a while. It's been a good time with 10.4. But again, you know, 10.5, I'm excited to see what they do next.
Well, the idea of once 10.4.9 came out, that was another big feature update. And I'm thinking maybe some of those things were meant for 10.5, but they gave them to us early, just because they need a little more time for 10.5. I guess my point is this: 10.5 has got to be a reworking of Final Cut Pro. Not just a glomming on of new features onto 10.4, because it's taken so long, just like from 10.0 to 10.1 was also 30 months, I think, 30 months. Right now we're at 32, 33.
And if 10.5 speculation is a collaboration thing and they change the way libraries work, you kind of need a robust, like, I'm going to stay on 10.49 for a little while to finish up this project.
Sure.
You need that release on your machine if the next version is going to be so dramatically different.
Absolutely.
Does 10.5 what does it need to work completely efficiently and natively on ARM Silicon? Does that have anything to do with Metal, or was Metal an Intel underpinning? It's like, are those optimizations in the code already present, or does it, like you said, have to be a completely, like, they've got to redo the code from the ground up to be hyper efficient on ARM as opposed to like this structure that we've been working off of for Intel?
My understanding with Metal is that that's just Apple's GPU language, similar to what NVIDIA has, like CUDA core. Mm-hmm. So and Apple wants any graphics card that's going to be supported on a Mac to preferably run on Metal. So that's kind of a sort of a separate thing, but obviously there was a lot of rewriting done to the effects to be optimized for Metal. As far as the silicon release, I mean, I know that Apple has the magic button for developers to just say, make this compatible.
It's like that Rosetta 2 barrier.
Yeah,
right.
I think we might be living in a world where Final Cut will have to be universal for the next 2 years, don't you think? Until Apple's completely switched over.
Well, they've already said, Tim Cook said they're going to be releasing Intel versions of Mac OS for years, plural, years. Yeah. So that's at least 2 more Mac OSs that'll be supported on Intel. And then even if they update the Mac OS and it's only silicon, doesn't mean your Final Cut Pro version stops working on your Intel machine.
So I don't know what the deal with 10.49 is, but I imagine we'll have universal binary versions of the app for
well,
the
we
next
already have
couple
that.
years.
Absolutely.
So, and then maybe 2022 or 2023 we get Final Cut 11 or I don't know, whatever the next version's called. Maybe that's when we break from the Final Cut Pro X or 10 name.
Well, if you think about how long we've all been benefiting of these updates for $400,
absolutely,
is
$299.
$300. You mean with motion and compressor?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay,
but yeah, $299. But it's like the meager amount of money we've all paid for this app and for how long it's been supported and the robust things that have been introduced since is mind-boggling.
Absolutely,
especially from a company like Apple. Like, the fact that it's not a subscription, and thank God, the fact that it's not. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So.
Well, they know that. I don't know if you're like me, but I always consider like my MacBook Pro, or like Richard just got a Mac Pro. That's your expensive dongle upgrade for Final Cut. So you may not buy the new version of the software, but you're like, yeah, I'll drop $4,000 to $8,000 on the new, whatever.
On the new machine.
Well, I'm only going to I'll probably get a MacBook Pro Apple Silicon. I don't need anything else besides that. I'll trade in my 2019.
Is this about needs, Richard, or is it about wants?
Well, it's about.
Are you his wife?
It's about just trying the Apple Silicon to see what it's like. I'm not going to buy it on day one, for one thing. I mean, I'm not going to do that. I did the Mac Pro because I knew they'd be kind of slow getting out to people. But the Apple Silicon, if the reviews come in, real world reviews show there's definitely an advantage, because Intel has already announced their next chipset, Thunderbolt 4, USB 4, PCIe, whatever the next gen is. They've already announced that stuff, which is going to be, leaps better than what they have now. So I'm going to presume that the silicon's going to be not a little step up from Intel, but a much bigger increment. But I'm not going to buy it until I see it.
When is Avid going to support Apple Silicon? That's when I'll.
That's going to be an interesting, point in tech history to see how that all rolls out.
Will Fortnite run on Apple Silicon?
All right, gentlemen, we've been on for an hour and 45 minutes. I think we're pretty well versed. Go ahead and plug your movie one more time. It's out this Friday.
So No Escape's coming out this Friday. It's coming out in 45 theaters across the United States. It's at 3 drive-ins close to LA: Vineland Drive-In, Van Buren Drive-In, and Ruby Doo Drive-In. That's in Riverside and City of Industry. It's also going to be on VOD, which is the main platforms are iTunes. So go there, rate it, put in when you go see it, give it a watch. It's also going to be on Amazon Instant and tons of other platforms. Our cast just did a whole press junket. So Holland Roden was on KTLA 5, and the director was doing magazine articles. So it's just there's this big media blowout right now. And upcoming theatrical releases that are still to come internationally. Russia and Denmark, it's coming out on September 24th. Norway is coming out on September 25th on 90 screens. Finland, it's coming out on October 30th on 50 screens. And in Japan in late October. So we're still coming out international. We're about to come out in the U.S. Please check out our movie. It was edited in Final Cut. Support your editors, support your assistants, support your directors, creative, all that stuff. And if you like it,
do you get residuals?
No, but regardless, we got to champion the movies that are edited in this platform and spread the word.
Absolutely. Well, going forward, we're going to see more movies edited in Final Cut, not less.
Oh, absolutely.
As Final Cut gets more mature and everything. And so one thing before we go, can Brad and I get a membership to the Final Cut Pro Cabal, even though we're not in LA?
Can we do that remotely now?
Yeah, I think absolutely you can. You've earned your spots.
All right.
Patrick, I will say Patrick Southern is the king Cabal leader, and you will have to kiss that ring. But other than that, I think the entry is guaranteed.
Excellent.
Thank
you, gentlemen.
Beard?
Maybe the beard and the ring and the new baby. That they're
you
having.
kind of lost the beard.
The beard's kind of gone now. He's more like
I thought he just cut it off and he put it up in a frame somewhere.
Well.
And the bonus is if you kiss the detached beard, you also get a Frame.io subscription as well. So it's like a dual thing. You get the dinners and the subscription.
You can't beat that.
That's right.
Brad Olson, Cris Mertens, and Stephen Moyer, thank you very much for coming on Final Cut Pro TV Live. We will talk to you guys later. Absolutely. Talk to you later.